Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Horizon Cloud Summit 2021. I'm not sure if all of you were already in our opening session, so let me briefly recap. The Horizon Cloud Summit 2021 is focusing on discussing new strategy for cloud computing in Europe. We have different sessions planned between today and tomorrow, and we are having on board several expert speakers from different domains, from different stakeholders that will help us shaping what are the main recommendations and indications that we want to provide to policymakers, to target audiences in order to ensure digital sovereignty of Europe, especially when it comes to cloud computing. In this part of the Horizon Cloud Summit, we have a high-profile panel, that will last about 1 hour, and I'm in great company. As you will see in a second. I have to first of all tell you my name. My name is Monique Calisti. I'm the CEO of Martel Innovate, and I will moderate this panel. Then, unfortunately, we will not have Alexandra Haas from Swisscom, as she's not feeling well, so she apologized, but she cannot be with us. On the other hand, we have a quite rich panel here, a quite rich group, and the idea is very much to create as many interaction moments as possible. So please, on swap card, drop your questions in the chat, and we will try to keep them and put them forward to the audience. So now I do a quick tour de table to introduce my speakers. Klaus Horwitz from Atos, Alban Schmutz from OVH Cloud. Sorry, I don't see any more my speakers' affiliations because the slide disappeared. I see, voilà, merci. I see Maria Barros Weiss from Jonas, Gert Martelinks. Gert, you will have to tell me how to pronounce your family name, from Threefold Tech. And I think the best is that I give the floor to each of them for them to shortly introduce themselves, what they do, and what is their vision for the digital autonomy in the computing continuum for Europe. I would give you about 5 minutes each, and then we can start with questions and more interactive part. And I would start with Alban, and then go ahead with Klaus, Maria, and finally Gert.
Sorry, I was on mute. So thanks, Monique. Good morning, everyone. To answer your question, so just to introduce myself quickly. So I'm working with OVH Cloud, but I'm also chairman of CISPE, which is a trade association gathering cloud infrastructure providers in Europe, and also a member of the team that is carrying GaiaX for quite some time there. And I think we're gonna come through many of these topics. To answer the question of what is digital autonomy, in my opinion, the question here is about how we ensure that all the conditions to tackle your own goals are met. So I think this is something that brings a large variety of topics, including data sovereignty, including value creation, including freedom to operate, climate goals, export controls on military or dual technologies, and some others. So, and this maybe just to illustrate why this is, I would say, a very important topic. So we've seen during the previous US administration that there was some tensions on a geopolitical level between EU and its historical ally in the US. And what we see worldwide is that such tensions can appear and can strengthen over time whenever. So being autonomous is a way to be able to address this. It does not mean to be, I would say, closed behind borders, but it creates, I would say, in my view, three main conditions we need to meet to be able to achieve a certain level of autonomy. The first one being that we need to be able to have the freedom of technological choice, meaning that wherever the technology comes, we need to be able to choose them and to move in and out. So this is about freedom of vendor lock-in, including also the questions of software licensing, for example, which is very key and not very often mentioned. We often mention the questions about chips, hardware, but software is something very important, and the ability to use software is even more important. I would say the second conditions is to have the offerings available that make this possible. So we need to have I would say, the best of breed technologies also developed in Europe, and this is lots of European players are doing that and carrying that. And this means also to create, I would say, industrial verticals where we are able to address this autonomy. We've seen, for example, during the pandemic, if we are not able to produce vaccines, then we have a problem. If we are not able to produce face masks, we have a problem. So in the digital area, the question is about chips, it's about software, it's about, I would say, security layers, etc. And the third one, and it's not the last one, the less important, I think it's to have the right legal framework to protect the users of the technologies, and to be able, for example, to ensure that users of cloud technologies are not subject to non-European extraterritorial regulations when they do not need so, and when they are operating in Europe to serve European customers, for example. So this means to have a protective legal framework on terms of security, of, I would say, data protection. GDPR is one of them, but it's also regarding the ability to have I would say, a market working properly, and especially regarding competition rules. So I think this is very key to understand what, in my opinion, is digital autonomy. So we need to be able to reach that, and maybe so I stop here for my, I would say, introductory speech. I think we're gonna have the opportunity to come back to this question later on.
Thank you, Alban. Please, Klaus, go ahead. You're on mute.
So I was warned about that. Difficult to actually add anything on top of what Alban very, very comprehensively has put together, but I'll try. So first of all, my name is Klaus Horwitz. I'm working for Atos. I'm on the one hand part of what we call the Atos scientific community, where we're looking at where do we believe where the markets are going to be in 4 years from now. And one of the things we very, very significantly see in a shift is that the use cases we have to be dealing with are all going to be about getting data, getting services, getting applications from various parties working together. So it's not anymore I build something and I'm on my own. We need to connect information in the area of healthcare, in the area of mobility, climate, decarbonization. And if we consider autonomy not only a problem anymore where I'm on my own and where I can make a decision, I use product A or B, this is not the case anymore because we need to connect to many other parties. Then autonomy drives into directions which are not technology anymore. And I think Alban explained that well. We have to look at technical autonomy, yes. How are we going to able to make our own choices? How do we have the capability not to be also dependent from somebody to say, oh, stop, you can't use my products anymore because we're in whatever kind of political conflict. So you need to have technical autonomy, but you have to have autonomy from a regulation perspective. Nobody should be able to tell you, I I will get your data because your services are operated by, let's say, an American company, just as an example, because we've seen that in the past. So technical autonomy, regulatory autonomy. But there's also one piece which I call commercial autonomy, because what we have seen in the past, there's of course the advent of the big platforms. Let's look at the mobiles. There's exactly two platforms, iOS and Android, that are significant. So we have become dependent on these two providers of services. If you look at transportation, you have on a global level, you have Uber and Lyft and perhaps one local player. So autonomy also means that we have the capability, if we want to provide commercial offerings, to do this independent from one or two parties that set all the rules for data or platform ecosystems. And last but not least, that's one term we will always see, is the question on sovereignty, where really regulations, states, nations give an impact and say, I want to have sovereign control of what's playing. And I think these are the four areas we believe that have to define autonomy going forward. And with that, I guess that was 5 minutes. I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Klaus. Maria, please go ahead.
Hi. So now it's really very difficult to add something to what was said. So my name is Maria Barros Weiss. I'm head of research in digital ecosystems in Ionos. Ionos is a leading cloud provider and hosting provider in Europe and worldwide. And for us, autonomy, it's a way, as cloud providers, it's a way of guaranteeing to our customers ownership of their data, sovereignty, compliance with regulations in the different countries, and privacy of their data as well. It was already here said, lots of perspectives and points that define autonomy and that guarantee us autonomy. And I just want to highlight what was already here said. Autonomy, it's really important to make Europe and to make industry in the different countries independent. In this case, at the moment, we know from Corona that this is very important, not depend only on externals. And at the moment, with the chip shortage, we feel the dependence we have already in Asian manufacturing. With the domain of the hyperscalers, we feel the dependence we have from hyperscalers regarding our data. So autonomy is what will guarantee us this independency. And this is very important mainly at the moment where we live in the different vertical sectors, but also in society, a digital transformation of most of the vertical sectors and of society itself. And for the digital automation to happen, it is very important to have autonomy, to have compliance with the different regulations, and to have technology that enables this digital transformation, because only then we can really have interoperability, we can really have sovereignty of data. So in the end, the key word, in my opinion, is trust. In order for digital transformation to take place, in order for autonomous systems to happen, customers, users need to trust these systems and need to trust that they have sovereignty and ownership of their data.
Thank you very much, Maria. Gert, please go ahead.
Hello, yes, I'm Gert Martelings. This is how you pronounce it. I'm working for Threefold Tech, which is a company that has in fact developed technology to make this digital autonomy a reality. I will have the opportunity to explain more about this afternoon. So to the audience, if you're interested in how we do it exactly, well, feel free to join us around 3 p.m. There is I'll be at that session. Now, what is digital autonomy to me? I'll take it from a slightly different angle. I like to define digital autonomy at the most individual level. To me, it's about decentralization, basically, and decentralization of all digital activity. People and organization having the power to become full master of their own digital life. And with that, I mean, without the need for any third-party organization to become a custodian of our data, any of the data, nor to run applications on a user's behalf. With a third-party organization, I also mean both cloud service providers nor big tech corporations running a platform. Any organization running something on behalf of us should not have the benefit of looking into our data, basically. Third parties basically have nothing to do with my digital life as an individual or as an organization, not with my data, unless, of course, I give explicit consent to share, which is sometimes the case when I have contractual agreements with these third parties, etc. That is something else. But also, if I want to run a website, if I want to run a game, whatever, these third parties don't have anything to do with what I'm doing there, unless I, as an individual, have given explicit consent to get an insight and to interact. So to me, digital autonomy is really about making this individual or organization master of everything that is running digitally around them.
Thank you, Gert. I think clearly there are some common characteristic aspects that emerged out of your introduction, and I think that's pretty obvious. There is an alignment on the need to avoid the big vendors lock-in, the need to give capability of choice, freedom of choice, and also freedom of protecting data in compliance with regulations. The need to ensure autonomy at several levels, technical level, but also commercial level, and also the need of here Gert stressed a lot the decentralization of all digital activities. Of course, there is, I think, when we consider these autonomy, we always are bound to the fact that we're living in a society, also digitally, we're interacting with others, and there is some sort of regulation that helps protecting the collectivity. Now, my question is about the following. Europe, at the level of regulation, is not a unique entity. So there's different kinds of regulations that might hold in different countries. And this could be one of the factor that is slowing down the further growth of cloud computing in Europe. What is your vision, especially because some of your organizations are active across several countries, not only in Europe, even worldwide, but what is, in your view, what is important to do in order to overcome this limitation? Maybe who wants to take it first?
It's a loaded question. I can give it a first try, because one of the things we are actually using to drive a little bit the question how to build trust between ecosystems and how to ensure data sovereignty and how to make technical interoperability a little bit easier is that we are working actively in associations like, for instance, GaiaX, which, as you may have noticed, exactly provides a solution for how we can build trust in decentralized, I like the term you use, Gert, in decentralized systems. It doesn't actually make a specific definition, you must do this, but you must declare in a self-description what compliance your service is going to offer. So it gives me the sovereign choice, an autonomous choice to say, I'm using a specific provider ABC that is giving me the level of autonomy that I have, and having the trust, even though we know there's different regulations. I have a model that allows me to choose based on my choice, which service to use for a specific function. I think that's a real quality that, for instance, Gaia X brings into building these decentralized ecosystems, how to connect various parties. And by the way, I just want to say this from the beginning, it's not even only American parties, because a virus doesn't stop at European borders. Climate change doesn't stop at borders. So it was important to also include the hyperscalers, but we have an autonomous choice to select based on a trust model where to go. And this helps, in my opinion, to accelerate user adoption of specific technologies and providers, and creates a market for autonomous technology offerings.
So I agree completely with Klaus. And being IONOS an international provider, what is important and for the cloud and all these technologies, enabling technologies, is to enable the legislation in place in the different places, enable the choices, enable the autonomy. And we are also, IONOS is also in the Gaia X Association and believing in the Gaia X direction. And again, it is not about being closed country-wise or Europe-wise. It's about having the technologies that enable to interoperate in compliance with the different rules and with the different choices. Because it's not, regulations are very important and they are in place exactly to protect the customers. But then there is also a part that is about the customer requirements and the customer choices. And autonomy and interoperability will allow that, and will provide mechanisms that make it work.
If I may,
maybe
go
to
ahead.
take your questions at the regulatory level, which was your question here. There's one thing that we need to see as well, is that at European level, today there are more than 20 regulations tabled by the European Commission, which are addressing cloud computing. So what this means is that basically the regulation of cloud services is on the rise, for sure. It's probably will be more regulated than the telcos at a certain point. Nevertheless, this means also that there is a higher pace of convergence, since many of these texts are really regulations that applies the same way in all countries. So it's a way to end the Balkanization of European regulations, where you have a regulation in Germany, another one in France, a third one in Finland, etc., on various topics. So GDPR was a good example, I would say, to start this, but I think it was only a starting point here. So there are things that are already on the move regarding impacting directly cloud computing, and what is ongoing and will be, I would say, be regulations in the following months and couple of years coming. It's it's tremendous. And just to take a few examples here regarding there are questions on the competition topic in the cloud area, on the regulation of the topic, especially including the slowness of traditional competition law application. So we've seen that, I would say, in all recent cases, I do not want to point the finger to one or the other players, but basically, when you start with a complaint, the final judgment and when it's applied, it's more than 10 years after. So this is not workable for the cloud. And therefore, there are a very important piece of regulation coming on, which is the Digital Markets Act, which will create ex ante obligations to what are called gatekeepers. So basically the biggest boys in the room, which will have, I would say, reinforced obligations regarding openness, interoperability, and few other topics. So I think this is something very key that is shaping, I would say, which is shaping Europe. If I take another example, which is, I would say, an ongoing, I would say, debate here regarding the creating a unique cybersecurity scheme for Europe, which is in the hands of the ENISA and the Cybersecurity Act. So today there is a scheme in Germany named C5. There is one in France named Sextim Cloud, and you have others. Even new are popping up. So the point is, if we want to have a workable European market, we need to have, I would say, one way to operate. I would say across Europe for everyone, and this is important, especially also for SMEs, which cannot afford to comply to 3, 4, or 5 different schemes. It's not possible. So this is ongoing, and I would say what is in the hands here on the authorities is very important to end the balkanization, and the way the content is designed will help to end such a balkanization or not. And if I'm referring to the debate of sovereignty here, for example, the questions is, shall we introduce at ENISA level criteria which are not purely cybersecurity related, but also regarding legal protection against non-European extraterritorial regulations? And this, if we are able to achieve this is the kind of things where we can have a shield workable everywhere across Europe, where everybody will be comfortable with. So that are the kind of things that are ongoing. I'm not speaking about the climate topic, but just to give a view
will come to
on
that,
the regulatory topic.
Sorry. I would like to give the possibility also to Gert to give us his opinion.
I'll just add a few elements. I agree with most of what has been told, but I'm a big fan of having the things done by design. Basically, we have seen in the past that by policy, by agreement, sometimes companies see holes in the system to their financial benefit, like surveillance capitalism business models have arisen from that, for example. So I think that we should really go for having things solved by design, so that there is basically no holes in the systems. And for regulators, I would state that two things. First of all, open source technology is on the rise, and it would really be good for European authorities to stimulate that more through funding, but also through, let's say, certifying pieces of software which are by definition transparent. Everybody can see what is inside this software. And European authorities could, for example, certify that this piece of software is respecting the highest standards that have been and the values that Europe is built upon, like privacy, like security, etc. And the second element is that European authorities would better do is stimulate this more innovation. And again, decentralization has had a big evolution in the last few years. And indeed, yes, blockchain, decentralized identities, cryptocurrencies are part of this innovation wave that is ongoing. It would be very good for European authorities to stimulate this kind of innovation also in a regulatory framework.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very dense tour of views. I tried to take notes and capture a few points. So what what we clearly need is to overcome, I think, fragmentation at multiple levels, including regulations. And clearly there are some efforts guided by the Commission that at European level could help in this direction. Of course, there is a lot of, in my opinion, especially listening to what Gert said right now, the problem of avoiding fragmentation and speeding up the flourishing of cloud computing in Europe, it's very much related to the capability we will have to combine bottom-up versus top-down approaches to overcome fragmentation. Because top-down approaches, pushing regulations, pushing for specific policies to be enforced is one thing. On the other hand, we have the community, the open source movements. We have a lot that is happening on a de facto rather than on de jure modality. And most probably, Europe, as always, will be a little bit of both, a little bit in between, especially because just thinking about GDPR, it has been a major step forward, but the cost associated to that are unaffordable for many small players in Europe. We don't have to forget that. So regulations come at a cost, and if there are no resources for all the players to align with these regulations, then somebody will be cut off. Now, what I think also it's very important that was touched, and I add these points because then it's going to be food for thoughts and next question, is the point of transparency, verifiability of the software. I mean, we are all used to live in a house that is full of devices and you name it that are under a warranty, that have been certified by someone as being green, red, yellow, or functioning according to some criteria. But there is very little, as we all know, in terms of certification of software, of many of the middleware components that we use and that we deploy. So here there is a very subtle, in my opinion, borderline, that is the one certifications versus liability. Of course, who's certifying and who's then liable for what? Still, there is a lot of work to be done. Is your organization involved in any of those activities? Also, Klaus mentioned before there are some pan-European efforts from AIoTI to others that are working at several levels on aspects of common relevance. But my question is, are you, your companies, your group involved in specific activities at company or national level also that go into this direction of ensuring better transparency, and how?
Well, I could start with that maybe. Well, our technology is open source. That's the first thing. So you cannot ask more transparency from an organization, I believe, than simply give an insight in the code that has been developed. So that is the first aspect around that transparency. And first of all, and second, the technology that we have done, we try to stimulate, we try to have this community bring together in order to make it evolve and look at everybody who has a good insight to improve even that technology. It goes a bit against what is happening, and I believe this is also why the hyperscales have grown so big. They're protecting themselves, and it has led also to some discussions in the past, like with Chinese players on 5G technology. It was not clear what was in there, and I think that really open source technology is the key to get there.
Thank you very much. Maria?
Also for IONOS, open source is part of our culture. Not only IONOS, but for the whole group, United Internet. For instance, 1&1 announced now in the deployment of their 5G to use Open RAN. And also in IONOS, we are, as part, for instance, of GaiaX, where the GaiaX federated service will be open source, and also the use of other open source technologies, both in our paths. Regarding the legislation, we are also compliant with the different legislations. And here, my point is that in the end, they are kind of complementary. Legislation also brings the trust, and it brings information to the users, to the customers, right? If we are compliant with the standards, if we are compliant with legislations, even if the open source is announced to be by design, following some compliance, then this also gives trust in using certain systems.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wants to add anything?
Well, yeah, well, very concretely, you asked a concrete question whether we are supporting these validation schemes, and I'm speaking also as running the architecture group in GaiaX. This is really essentially what the core functionality is that we're going to be providing, that we're setting up a framework that everybody who's offering services like Gert or Maria, they will publish their so-called self-description, and then we have a mechanism that decentralized companies can actually validate this service is according to a regulation, this service is according to a specific technology standard, or this service is according to the rules that a specific data space is setting up. But I was actually so GaiaX is going to address this issue, and we are actively, like many of the others, like everybody else in the call, is participating in that. But I was hesitating with my answer because if you look at the value, as long as we have very, very fragmented regulation, as long as we have very, very fragmented technology stacks, as long as we have very, very fragmented interoperability, the statement of compliance means, yes, you are compliant to a very, very specific, narrow scope of definition. We can say, Gert's software is open source, but that can be validated, but we cannot say Gert's software is going to be interoperable with many of the other softwares, because if there's 500 standards, we would have to make that validation 500 times. So there's an enormous need, just like Alban said, that we simplify balkanization is the term I think you used, of regulations, but also that we actually come to a more standardized and more aligned technology stack around, now I use the word, the cloud edge continuum. And this is why we are also participating, I think, like everybody else in this call, on the important project Common European Interest for cloud infrastructure services, because this, in my opinion, is going to be a very, very key component if we manage to have multiple companies working together on one stack across the continuum, that the validation of technologies becomes meaningful. Because if at that point in time we can say, okay, we built this continuum of decentralized providers. So that's my case.
Thank you, Klaus. I'm taking notes. Alban, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to first to fully agree with Klaus here, and that's what OVH Cloud is engaged in. So having I would say an open DNA since its birth, and now engaging in what we do in GaiaX with the whole community as well. Here, as we have been part of other open source projects as well, but I think this is something very strong on the move. On the question of I would say regulatory topics and how you comply things and how you ensure openness, etc. Just want to take my hat of CISPE here, just to explain what we have been doing on that topic very quickly since several years already. So CISPE, so it's a trade association of cloud providers, has developed a data protection code of conduct, which basically which has been approved by the European Data Protection Board, which embed no access to customer data. That's mandatory. And I think this answers one of the points raised by Gert in this introductory speech. It's bringing transparency on, I would say, location of data, where they are stored and processed at the urban area level. So this is very important. It's also meant by, and you ensure that you can have a freedom of choice to store and process data exclusively in Europe. So you have a full framework here regarding data protection, which has been developed and answering such questions, where we can certify your services against and have a third-party independent monitoring on this topic under the regulation. A second thing we have been working on is regarding the question of switching and porting of data under the free flow of non-personal data regulation by co-chairing the development of the SWIPO YAS code on being able to, I would say, facilitate, give more transparency to enable, I would say, portability from one provider to another. We have been developing also and launch a climate neutral data center pact regarding transparency and meeting goals. Even more than transparency, is meeting goals on climate neutrality to ensure, I would say, cloud providers in Europe are climate neutral by 2030 with KPIs and thresholds to meet on energy efficiency, on use of renewables, of water conservation, of recycling or reuse of it. So all this is a framework as well you can certify against. And we also have been carrying more recently fair software principles together with CIO associations across Europe, in Germany, in France, in Belgium, in Italy and others, to ensure that when it's coming to software licenses, I would say fairness is applied and can be demonstrated as well. So all this has been developed through CISPE, and referring to what Klaus said, is all this is carried also towards Gaia-X, since what we ensure is that there is a third party against those topics which can certify that, okay, the job has been done properly, and then Gaia-X will be able to refer to it through verifiable credentials to make sure that the whole chain of trust, when services are declared under Gaia-X, will benefit also and will inherit of this information on the top of all what is required on the technical level. So this is a bit what I can add here on what we have been doing through CISPE on the topic.
Can I just add one element?
Sure, go ahead.
Because Gaia-X has defined this role of a federator, and this is basically where we see that our technology could help. Everybody could connect to what we call a peer-to-peer operating system, where every cloud service provider can join and provide their capacity to make this full ecosystem a reality. So it's open to everything, to every CSP. It's open to all to participate. And the starting point, the angle that you should take always is that how to make technology in a way that it's open by design. This is basically what we have tried to do. And I think that is the key.
Thank you, Gert. Again, very dense. A lot of aspects have been touched. I was looking at one of the questions from Mark in the chat here. The question essentially says, regarding recent proposals for ex-ante compliance for players in the data economy, these kinds of proposals always seem to favor the biggest companies who have resources to comply. How should Europe deal with these? And I would add, considering that many of the players are not big players, and as I mentioned before, the barrier, it's often the fact that resources are missing. You represent relatively big tech providers. What is your experience maybe with your partners, your customers? So how can smaller European players cope with this situation?
So maybe I would start first saying that when we speak of ex-ante regulation here, it's especially under the topic of the competition rules, which apply to gatekeepers. So it's very big companies, and you can count them on your fingers. So it does not, I would say, hinder or generate costs for smallest players. At the contrary, if you have the problem that is identified, and for example, I think that the next cloud complaint released last week on the topic against one of the biggest players in the room makes this very clear. So the freedom of choice to be able to integrate the ecosystem of one of a big player. If you are not able to do it, then for smallest player, you may be out of business. So that's very important. So it creates openness, and it has to ensure, I would say, to facilitate the work regarding interoperability and integration in other ecosystems. So that's very important to understand. It's not a burden for the smallest player. It's an opportunity, and it's a burden for the biggest players. But given their size, I think they need to cope with this. So I would say this is regarding competition rules. You may think of ex-ante approach also regarding, for example, what we may do in Gaia-X, saying, okay, if you want to have a service labeled, you need to comply with all those rules on our architecture, etc. This is also something you need to do, I would say, first. But anyhow, whatever you do, this is what you have to do in the tech area. So if you need to be able to demonstrate that what you do answer the customer requirements. So what we do in Gaia-X is to ensure, I would say, a level playing field that is open, where it's easily able to integrate, and not once again, I think it's lowering the barriers rather than increasing it.
Thank you, Alban. Please, Gert.
I think that the digital autonomy in itself is an opportunity for small cloud players to enter the market, basically, because those players know very well the local situation. They're way better than the hyperscalers to turn this knowledge of this local situation into their benefit. I see two main elements. The move of cloud towards the edge is coming, with demand for very low latencies and data really close to where this data is consumed, with evolutions of bringing cloud to the edge and even far edge, seen in many technologies such as 5G, metaverse, now also IoT, smart cities, self-driving cars. I could continue. There is this need of very low latency. So cloud technology will be integrated in devices, or at least be very nearby, like in a cell phone base station or whatever. So small players know this local market and can make the difference here, in my opinion. And another element is the security and privacy preserving aspects, which make that in industries such as finance or health, where privacy is of very big importance, and often data needs to stay in the jurisdiction or very locally, small players again know best the local regulation and market, and are able to offer cloud capacity that meets these requirements in terms of privacy and security. So currently, these sectors have not really made the switch yet. So health and finance, for example, to cloud, because it's not secure enough. And I think that there, small players can make the benefit, really.
I would like to add also, I would also like to add partnering, because we said it already here, open by design, and associating the associations based on open source that allow and that have different models for smaller players and big players in order to distribute responsibilities and costs, but also are partnering, because in these digital solutions for the Cloud Edge Continuum, partnering is crucial, right? It's probably the key. And this also allows to share responsibilities, to share costs, and to share burdens.
We also, Maria, fully agree, but I also would like to add one point to what Gert said. even though small and medium sized companies have a good way to address very local requirements, we need to give the opportunity to scale them up across the wider marketplace. It's because otherwise you will either be bought up by a big player, or you will remain in a very, very tight space. And I think Gaia X, as one example, is a multi-party governance. It's the way for small companies to join forces. As Alban said, the tiniest company has exactly the same voting rights as the biggest company. We see a lot of contribution from small innovative companies in the discussions, in the designs we're taking forward. And as well as Gaia X does that for trust and identity systems and validation systems. I think we've seen the speech from Lars Nagel from IDSA. They do that for data sovereignty. There's other alternatives. I can't list them all, but working together in associations and define a clear position on this is the architectures, this is the policies, this is the rules that actually allow the smaller ones to scale, to build their solution then across a much wider scope, and to also avoid that bigger parties create a certain lock-in, is, I think, a very critical way going forward, so that we create this multi-party governance of companies jointly defining where we have to go, versus one big guy says, this is the way we're going, which is the alternative.
I think, in a way, you touch many of the aspects that are key to, in fact, create this digital continuum, also in a way that is feasible and that allows to overcome fragmentation in Europe. We are the house of diversity. Ultimately, Europe is the place where there are a lot of different players, and there's a quite strong coexistence of different communities, of different initiatives. We mentioned some of them today. There are several. Here, the key is to find a way for them to interact and collaborate so that synergies can be created. Because in a way, when we talk about digital autonomy of Europe, clearly, how can we truly achieve that while working with hyperscalers from the US and China? We know that there is still a big dependency on this. So what is your view on this? How can we claim, or how can we achieve digital autonomy when still we need to work with the hyperscalers from the US and China?
This is exactly the point, Monique. In my opinion, and I think it was already expressed here, to have autonomy, digital autonomy, Europe doesn't need to close itself to work alone, but really find ways in enabling technologies and regulations that allow us all to interoperate, all to be sometimes together part of an end-to-end system. But respecting the regulations, respect in the different countries, respecting the customers' requirements, respecting the ownership, and each also for small players, for big players, working together in order to comply with local requirements, with niche requirements, and with the overall requirements as well. So find technologies that are interoperable and allow, like it was also here said, if we have 500 different regulations, it's not possible to tailor them all, right? But find a way of, in the different situations, to look to the relevant regulations, relevant requirements, and be interoperable in offering solutions for those.
Yes, I agree, and I think we shouldn't position ourselves as in a Calimero position, like we are dependent on these hyperscalers. I don't agree. We should be aware of what we can bring. We have very strong regulation, and in Europe is the best place to deal with that. Like, for example, GDPR, it's world leading. So I don't agree that we start from the idea that we are too much dependent on hyperscalers. We can make our own digital future.
Thank you. I have a question. Alban, you wanted to add something?
I would just like to make three very quick points on this. I think it's an important question. First, I think we have to ensure the legal conditions to make this possible. So GDPR, I agree with Gert, is one of the things, but I would say the level playing field and the competition law are very important here to ensure that we can, I would say, compete, I would say, properly, and we are not hindered by undue competition behavior. The second point, I think, it's very illustrated by Gaia-X. We need to ensure that we are fully protecting customers from non-EU extraterritorial regulations. So I think this is important for the takeoff of the cloud and the user side, but also the provider side, but the user side in particular, and to develop what is required also to avoid vendor lock-in and all the technical consideration, the technical architecture, the developments, the open developments, etc. from Gaia-X are very clear part to that. And the third point we haven't discussed here today, but I think it's very important in terms of levy, is also to have a clear EU public procurement framework that is targeting European players and in particular SMEs, since I think this is also one of the conditions to take off and to ensure the autonomy. So we haven't discussed it today, but I think this is a very, very important levy we need to push for.
Thank you, Alban.
For me, just add one final word. I think autonomy doesn't mean and will not mean that we do 100% of stuff ourselves, because supply chains don't stop anywhere. Healthcare viruses don't stop at the borders. So I think the emphasis needs to be on fair competition, level playing field, and also work with the other cloud providers to make sure that we really can play to our strength, as well as some of the other players will play against their strength. So it needs to be a fair competition with a fair playing field, but autonomy cannot mean, sorry to say that so bluntly, cannot mean we do everything ourselves, because that's happening nowhere in our economies, and it would be bad if the other countries would just drive American or Asian cars, for example, or other products. And we live from exporting. We have to also find the balance in this space, fair competition, level playing field, and get the others on board.
Thank you. We have very little time left. Unfortunately, we have less than a minute left before the end of our session. So let me first of all thank you all for insightful and very dense also reflections on aspects that I think find all the different players that we have heard today very much aligned. So I think that's a very good news. From different countries, from different initiatives, European players are getting aligned on what are the key values and core values that we want to protect. Now, the time is over. I don't know if we're officially cut or if my colleagues can give me a sign whether on Swapcard they can still hear us. Okay, great. I just wanted to anticipate that the next session will be on cloud standardization and open source for a robust digital cloud landscape, and that it will start at 1 p.m. Central European time. The moderator will be Giovanni Rimassa, CIO of Martel Innovate, and we'll have great speakers again on stage. So we will see each other later on today. Thanks again to all of you that were with us during this high-level panel on digital autonomy in the cloud, in the computing continuum. Thanks a lot, and have a nice lunch break.